Aralyn's last breath came not in the quiet dignity of her youth, but in a haze of pain and disbelief, the taste of iron sharp on her tongue. The candlelight flickered against the pale walls of the chamber, casting grotesque shadows over the embroidered tapestries that her ancestors had once proudly displayed. She could feel the chill of the stone floor beneath her fingers, dampened by the pool of crimson spreading beneath her. It seemed almost poetic, in a cruel way the color of life, and of betrayal, mingled at her very end. 18 years, a single lifetime, now shattered. Her thoughts raced, fractured and vivid, images of the past and present colliding in a chaotic storm. She remembered the moment she first believed in Lucian, her husband, with a clarity that now made her stomach twist. His hands, warm and insistent, had promised her the world, had whispered about love and devotion, and she, naive and desperate to find her place in a court of polished smiles and hidden daggers, had believed him. How blind she had been. How miserably, fatally blind. The betrayal had begun quietly, almost imperceptibly. Lucian had never been cruel at first. He had been attentive, charming in the way of men who understand exactly how to wrap a woman's hopes around their fingers. And then the subtle manipulations began. A look here, a word withheld there, a seed planted in Aralyn's mind that it was her fault whenever something went wrong. But nothing compared to the ultimate horror he had forced upon her in this very room. The memory of that day twisted in her mind, an endless loop of anguish. The child she had carried, nearly to term, ripped from her womb by Lucian's merciless hand. She had screamed for mercy, for a shred of humanity, but none came. He had argued that it was necessary. For the future he envisioned a future that would see her own half-sister, Valeria, rise by her side instead. The cruelty of the act was made even worse by Valeria's silent, calculating approval. Aralyn had loved her sister once, had believed in their shared bonds, and now that trust lay in ruins, twisted into something unrecognizable. The pain had not ended with the miscarriage. The blood loss had been severe, and as she lay on the cold floor, she could hear Lucian speaking to the Emperor, weaving lies, begging for Valeria's hand in marriage. The words, as she recalled them, burned through her mind like molten iron. He spoke of love and devotion, of unity and prosperity, while her own heart, shattered and bleeding, knew the truth. She had been nothing but an obstacle in his calculated game, a stepping stone for his ambition, and she had been blind enough to let him deceive her entirely. Her parents, Lord Cedric and Lady Amara, were no comfort in those final moments. They had been imprisoned unjustly, accused of treason in a plot fabricated by jealous courtiers who sought to strip the house of its influence. Aralyn's mind replayed the day of their downfall in excruciating detail, the torchlit corridors of the dungeons, the faces of guards who had once called her father a friend, now twisted with disdain, and the echoes of her mother's tears. She had been powerless to save them, powerless to prevent the collapse of everything she had known as a child. And yet, amidst all this ruin, it was not death that filled her heart with the heaviest grief. It was the suffocating awareness of her own mistakes. How she had trusted, how she had laughed and loved without suspicion, only to discover that the world's cruelty was sharper than any blade. Her blindness to Lucian's schemes, her gullibility in the face of Valeria's false sweetness, it had cost her everything. Her breaths came shallow and ragged now, and she realized with agonizing clarity that she would not see the sunrise again. She would not hold the child that had been stolen from her, would not watch her parents regain their rightful place, would not taste the simple joys of life that had seemed so ordinary before tragedy fell upon her. The room tilted around her as the darkness crept closer, a heavy, inescapable blanket. And yet, in that suffocating darkness, a spark remained. A desperate, fragile wish, fragile as the last flower in a winter garden. She closed her eyes, her fingers twitching against the cold stone as if reaching for something just out of reach. She wished for clarity, for justice, for a chance to correct her mistakes, for a life in which the betrayal would never have taken root. She wished for a second chance, a life unspoiled by the treachery that now claimed her body and her heart. Aralyn felt herself slipping, the edges of consciousness fraying like worn silk. Her final thought was not of fear, not of anger, but of bitter, aching hope, a hope she clung to with the last of her strength. Perhaps, somewhere beyond the cruel hands of fate, she would awaken again. Perhaps she could rise from the ashes of her own life, unbroken this time, wiser and unafraid. And then, the world went silent. Aralyn awoke to the gentle lapping of water, a cool breeze brushing her flushed cheeks, and the pungent scent of wet earth filling her nostrils. For a moment, she couldn't move, couldn't think, because her body felt wrong, lighter, softer, unscarred, and yet, a familiar ache lingered deep in her chest. She blinked, squinting against the morning sun, and the world came into sharp focus, the tall oaks by the lake, their branches bending under the wind, and the shimmer of water that stretched farther than her eyes could follow. Panic surged through her as memories of her death flooded back: the betrayal, the miscarriage, Lucian's merciless hands, the blood, the cold floor of her chamber. Her fingers instinctively went to her abdomen, and when they found nothing, she gasped. No scar, no wound, no trace of the life that had been stolen from her. Her heartbeat quickened, and a strange, electric hope prickled through her veins. She turned her head slowly, and there, sprawled a few feet away, was the sight that confirmed it: herself. Her 16-year-old body, lying unconscious on the damp grass, hair plastered against her forehead from the fall. Her pulse quickened further. She remembered the lake, the accident, her sister Valeria's scheming smile, Lucian's smug, condescending face, the push, the fall. Valeria had slipped, or so the story had gone. Lucian had rescued her, knocking Aralyn unconscious in the chaos. Aralyn's lips trembled as she fought back tears, half laughter, half horror. She had been given a second chance, a literal do-over. Her body was 16 again, the day Lucian had arrived to propose, and her life had been rewritten with one tiny shift. One accident. One fall into a lake. And yet everything had changed. Her mind raced. The knowledge of what was to come, the betrayals, the pain, the loss, all of it was hers to rewrite. And with that knowledge came a weight heavier than she could bear. Could she trust herself to act differently? Could she navigate the same treacherous waters without sinking? Her thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice, shaky and filled with concern. Aralyn! Aralyn, wake up! She turned her head, squinting against the sunlight, and saw her father, Lord Cedric, rushing toward her, his long coat flapping in the wind, eyes wide with worry. Behind him came Lady Amara, her skirts rustling as she ran, her hands trembling as if she could catch Aralyn's very life in them. My daughter, her mother whispered, voice cracking. Oh, thank the gods you're alive. The sight of them, unharmed, brought tears to Aralyn's eyes. In her past life, she had watched helplessly as her family had been dragged into disgrace and imprisonment. And now here they were, vibrant and whole, unaware of the tragedies that awaited them, unaware of Lucian's machinations and Valeria's cruelty. The knowledge gave her a mix of relief and fear. Relief that they were safe for now, and fear for the battles she would have to fight to ensure they stayed that way. Aralyn struggled to sit up, wincing as the remnants of the head injury throbbed. I'm fine, she whispered, her voice hoarse, though her mind screamed that nothing would ever be fine again. Her father knelt beside her, gripping her hands tightly, while her mother fussed over her hair, brushing the wet strands back from her face. You had us terrified, Lord Cedric said, voice trembling. You slipped near the lake one moment, you were laughing, the next, he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, the unspoken terror in his eyes clear. Aralyn nodded faintly, swallowing hard, and forced a smile she did not feel. It was an accident, she said, though her voice carried a weight that made even she shiver. This accident, she realized, had been her salvation. The day Lucian would arrive, the day she had first walked into the trap of her own life, was still ahead. And now she could navigate it armed with knowledge of the future. But even as hope stirred, doubt lingered. Could she truly change fate? Could she prevent the betrayals, the miscarriages, the deaths? The weight of her prior knowledge pressed down like a physical force, heavy and unyielding. She could not allow herself to falter. She had lived once, and failed. She would not fail again. Her family, oblivious to the storm brewing in her mind, began to lead her back to the manor. The path was familiar, the cobbled streets, the towering walls, the sense of roasting meat and fresh bread from the village below. But Aralyn saw it differently now, with the eyes of someone who had tasted betrayal and death, someone who knew the fragility of life and the cunning of men. Every shadow, every passing glance could be a threat. When they arrived at the family estate, her grandmother, Lady Isolde, was waiting in the grand hall, sharp-eyed and commanding even in the flickering candlelight. She was formidable, a matriarch whose mere presence demanded respect. Aralyn felt a rush of gratitude. Her grandmother had been a pillar of strength in her past life, a figure who had quietly guided her family through countless crises. Now, Aralyn understood she would have to lean on her even more, though in ways her younger self had never dared. Aralyn, Lady Isolde said, voice low but firm, eyes studying her granddaughter with a piercing intensity. You have returned from a near-death fall. That is fortunate. There was no warmth in the words, only the precision of a mind that measured everything, feared nothing. But I can see you. Something has changed. Tell me, child. What weighs on you so heavily? Aralyn's chest tightened. Could she tell her grandmother? Could she even articulate the impossible truth that had unfolded? She shook her head slowly, a faint smile ghosting her lips. I'm just grateful to be alive, she said, knowing that even that half-truth contained a kernel of reality. She was alive. She had a second chance. As she spoke, a memory of Lucian's smirk, Valeria's false innocence, and the child she had lost flashed in her mind. The anger, grief, and determination coiled inside her like a living thing, demanding release. She could not act rashly, not yet, but she could plan. Every smile, every word, every gesture in the coming days could be a calculated move. She would protect her family, reclaim her life, and ensure that betrayal would never touch her again. For the first time since the fall, Aralyn allowed herself a flicker of hope. She had been returned not merely to life, but to opportunity. She would walk the path of her youth armed with foresight, cleverness, and the resolve that had only been born from tragedy. The Aralyn who had died in agony, alone and betrayed, would no longer exist. In her place was someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who would not be caught unprepared. And as she looked at the faces of her family, radiant and untouched by the darkness she remembered, she silently vowed, Lucian would never harm her again. Valeria would never betray her with impunity. And the life she had been robbed of would, somehow, be restored not just for herself, but for the family she loved more than anything in the world. Aralyn did not yet know how she would accomplish it. The days ahead would be treacherous, full of deception, danger, and heartbreak. But she had something that her younger self had never possessed, knowledge. Knowledge of the pain, of the schemes, of the treachery that awaited. And with that knowledge, she would be unstoppable. She drew a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of the manor, the fresh promise of a day she would not let slip away. The second chance she had been given would not be squandered. She would live differently. She would live deliberately. And she would ensure that no shadow, no lie, no betrayal would ever claim her again. The grand hall of the Aldercrest Manor glittered with the gold and crimson of candlelight, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Guests in silken gowns and embroidered coats whispered, laughed, and curtsied, their eyes darting with curiosity and judgment. The hall smelled of roasted pheasant, warm bread, and faint traces of perfume, all mingling with the scent of polished wood and candle wax. Aralyn walked among them, her steps deliberate, her posture flawless, though inside her chest, her heart hammered like a drum announcing war. She could see him before anyone else, the man who had once destroyed her life and would, she now realized, never have the opportunity to do so again. Lucian stood near the dais, his dark eyes scanning the room, resting briefly on her before he moved toward her half-sister, Valeria. Valeria's face, pale with feigned distress, was angled just so, her hands pressed delicately to her chest as though the weight of her suffering could be seen and measured. She was playing the role they had once expected Aralyn to accept, and the knowledge made her stomach twist. Aralyn paused near the ornate fireplace, studying the scene with a sharpness born of experience. The truth was clear to her now, Lucian's charm, Valeria's cunning, their carefully orchestrated performances all designed to trap, humiliate, and control. In her past life, she would have reacted with confusion, desperation, or helpless anger. But now she knew better. She would not stumble, she would not plead, and she would not allow herself to be ensnared. Her eyes met Lucian's across the room, and she held his gaze, letting a calmness settle over her features that belied the storm within. She let the truth of her awareness show just enough to unsettle him but not enough to reveal her full hand. Lucian's smile faltered for the briefest moment, just a twitch at the corner of his lips, before he recovered, the practiced mask of devotion slipping perfectly back into place as he moved closer to Valeria. Aralyn, he said when he finally approached her, voice soft, honeyed with false concern. I hear you were unwell after your fall. The whole household feared for you. She nodded lightly, the smallest arch of her brow conveying more than words ever could. I am quite recovered, thank you, she said, her voice smooth, controlled. Your concern is appreciated. Lucian's smile deepened, as though he were inspecting a curious artifact. And Valeria, she was beside herself. She feared you would not recover, that this accident might have been worse than it seemed. Aralyn's chest tightened. Her sister's feigned anguish was unbearable to witness, a mockery of the genuine suffering Aralyn had once endured. But she refused to show anything beyond a graceful tilt of her chin. She had no intention of engaging in their lies. Instead, she allowed the memory of her past life to guide her. "You have been very brave," she said softly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "It must be difficult to manage your own fears while tending to the concerns of others." Lucian's eyes flickered, caught off guard by her tone, not hostile, not accusing, merely observant. Aralyn smiled faintly, a smile that suggested understanding but carried the subtle bite of irony. She turned her gaze to the assembly around them, allowing herself to perform the role expected of a young noblewoman, demure, gracious, composed. Then she did something completely unexpected. Her voice rang out across the hall, steady, clear, and dripping with deliberate theatrics. "I suppose it is time I speak plainly. It has become clear that I have been an obstacle to love, to happiness, and to plans not meant for me." A hush fell over the hall. Servants paused mid-step, a harpist's bow hovered over strings, and the chatter of noblewomen and gentlemen ceased. Aralyn let the silence linger, savoring it, letting it sink into every mind present. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, letting her hand sweep toward Lucian as though presenting him to the room. "I release Lucian from any engagement to me," she continued, her tone calm, almost serene, though her heart pounded with exhilaration. "Let him be free to pursue his happiness, without interference from one who has been inadequate." Gasps rippled through the guests. Some whispered, scandalized. Others watched, enthralled by the unexpected display of dignity mixed with subtle humiliation. Lucian's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening, but he dared not speak. Valeria's lips parted, as if to interject, but she faltered under the scrutiny of the room and, more importantly, Aralyn's unwavering gaze. From the corner of the hall, Aralyn's grandmother, Lady Isolde, observed with the precision of a hawk. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. She saw everything, the subtle tremor in Lucian's hand, the faltering mask on Valeria's face, the tension in the assembly. In a single, fluid motion, she rose from her seat and addressed the room with authority that brooked no challenge. "Then let it be so," Lady Isolde declared, her voice echoing against the high ceilings. "If Aralyn releases her engagement, then the match shall be transferred where it is clearly desired. Let Valeria take the place of the bride, and Lucian shall be wed, though let the court note the status of such a union." The words were deliberate, sharp, and executed with the precision of a master strategist. Lucian's face paled as he realized the implications. While the engagement would technically remain, the power and prestige of the match had been stripped from him, given instead to Valeria, but Valeria, a lesser bride in stature, without the political and social capital he had sought. His carefully laid plans had been upended in a single, decisive stroke. Aralyn allowed herself a quiet smile, barely perceptible. She had not needed to act rashly or confront him directly. By releasing Lucian publicly and allowing her grandmother to intervene, she had turned the court's attention away from her and onto the would-be schemers. She had retained her dignity, humiliated Lucian, and asserted her own agency without a single accusation. Lucian recovered quickly, forcing a polite, practiced bow toward Lady Isolde. "Your wisdom is unparalleled, my lady," he said smoothly, though his teeth clenched behind the courteous mask. Valeria curtsied, her lips tight, her composure faltering under the pressure of scrutiny. The guests murmured, some impressed by Aralyn's selflessness, others shocked by the audacity of her renunciation. But in that moment, Aralyn felt the first flicker of triumph she had ever known, not from revenge, not from anger, but from clarity. She had stepped into the arena fully aware of the stakes and had emerged unscathed, the threat diminished, the first move in the new game laid before her. Later, alone in the family sitting room, Aralyn allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her grandmother appeared, silent as a shadow, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have done well," Lady Isolde said softly, her eyes reflecting pride and a quiet amusement. "Do not underestimate the importance of control. You have set the board in your favor without striking a single piece." Aralyn exhaled, letting a smile of relief mix with the fierce determination that had begun to burn in her chest. "I can see the board," she said, voice low but certain. "And this time I will not be a pawn. I will move each piece as I choose. Lucian, Valeria, the Emperor himself, none of them will dictate the course of my life." Her grandmother nodded. "Good. But remember, child, the game has only begun. The world will test you again, and not all battles are won by wit alone. You must grow stronger, wiser, and unyielding." Aralyn's eyes burned with resolve. "I will," she whispered, almost to herself. "Stronger than ever. I will protect my family, reclaim what was stolen, and ensure that no betrayal can ever touch me again." For the first time since her return, she felt the power of her second chance in her veins. She was no longer the naive girl who had trusted blindly and lost everything. She was Aralyn, returned, aware, and unstoppable. And as the sun dipped behind the windows, casting long golden shadows across the ornate halls, she realized the truth she had longed to believe: the past had ended, and her future was hers to command. The corridors of Aldercrest Manor felt unusually quiet as Aralyn followed her father, Lord Cedric, through the twisting halls. Each step echoed against the stone walls, a reminder that though the manor was her home, it was also a fortress, a sanctuary built against a world that would all too easily crush those who could not defend themselves. Aralyn's mind raced, recalling every betrayal, every plot, every whisper of courtly intrigue from her past life. Lucian's ambition, Valeria's manipulation, the Emperor's subtle scheming, they were all pieces in a dangerous game, and now she was determined not to lose. Her father's hand, rough and warm, squeezed hers briefly, an anchor against the storm of her thoughts. "You've done well," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. "I have never been prouder of you, Aralyn. But you must understand, the court does not forget easily. What you did tonight was bold, but boldness alone will not keep you safe." "I know," Aralyn said softly. She had spent countless nights in her previous life imagining how she might have acted differently, and the sting of hindsight still burned in her chest. "I can't let Lucian or anyone else control my life or my family again. Not now, not ever." Her father nodded. "Good. Then you must prepare. There are certain arrangements I can make. Arrangements that will shield you from imperial pressure, from forced unions, and from those who might use the past against you." His tone was careful, almost hesitant. He stopped before a heavy oak door and pushed it open, revealing a chamber lined with maps, ledgers, and the quiet authority of long years spent in governance and strategy. "This," he said, gesturing to the room, "is the beginning of your protection. But the first step must be sacrifice." Aralyn tilted her head, cautious. "Sacrifice?" Her father's expression was grim. "I will surrender the military power our house commands and the secret force of shadow guards who serve the crown in secret to the Emperor himself." He let the words hang in the air. "In exchange, I will request one thing, that you, my daughter, receive the unprecedented title of Princess of Fuan, and the right to choose your own husband." Aralyn's chest tightened. The title, the independence, the security, it was more than she could have hoped for in this life. Yet the cost, the surrender of her family's greatest weapon, stung. Her father had spent decades building influence, cultivating loyalty, and guarding the family's honor. To give it all away would leave them vulnerable in other ways. "I don't want you to do that," Aralyn said, her voice shaking slightly. "There must be another way. A way to protect the family without giving up everything." Cedric's eyes were steady, full of the calm authority she had always admired. "There is no other way. The Emperor is cautious, shrewd, and suspicious of our power. He would see your independence as a threat, and Lucian, if he senses weakness, will exploit it. This is the only guarantee that you will remain safe." Aralyn drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her like a mantle. She could feel the ghosts of her past life hovering, reminding her of the child she had lost, of the parents she had failed to protect, of the helplessness that had consumed her in her final moments. She could not allow history to repeat itself. If surrendering her father's military force was the price of safeguarding her family and herself, then she would bear it without hesitation. "Then we do it," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the storm within. "I won't be the one to fail again." Cedric's lips pressed into a thin line, a mixture of pride and sorrow. "Very well. I will present our case to the Emperor. It will not be simple. It will require negotiation, cunning, and patience." He placed a hand over hers. "You will need to be ready, Aralyn. This is only the beginning." Over the next weeks, the house was alive with quiet preparation. Servants moved with precision, messengers carried coded letters to distant allies, and Aralyn spent hours with her grandmother, Lady Isolde, learning the art of negotiation, observation, and subtle influence. Her days were a blur of strategy sessions, careful diplomacy, and constant vigilance, and yet, for the first time, she felt a fierce sense of agency. This was not a life imposed upon her, this was a life she could shape. Finally, the day came when Cedric and Aralyn traveled to the imperial palace to present their offer. The halls of the Emperor's residence were as imposing as she remembered from her past life, marble floors polished to a reflective shine, tapestries depicting the victories and conquests of generations, and guards stationed with an unyielding precision. The emperor himself, seated on a raised dais, regarded them with keen, calculating eyes. "My lord, my daughter," he said, his tone polite but layered with scrutiny. "You come with an unusual request, I hear. Speak plainly, what is it you seek?" Cedric stepped forward, voice steady. "Your Majesty, the House of Aldercrest surrenders its military command and its loyal shadow guards. In return, we request a single boon, that my daughter, Aralyn, receive the title of Princess of Fuan, and the unprecedented right to choose her own husband, free from imperial coercion." The emperor's eyes flickered toward Aralyn, as if measuring her for some hidden trait. "A princess who chooses her own consort," he murmured, voice tinged with curiosity. "That is a bold request. One that could upset the delicate balance of courtly marriages and alliances." Aralyn met his gaze with calm, unflinching eyes. "I understand, Your Majesty. But I seek only to protect my family and ensure stability. My father's surrender of power demonstrates our loyalty and intent. I ask only that, in return, my autonomy be respected." The emperor's lips curved into a faint, inscrutable smile. "Very well. You shall have your title, and your choice shall be honored." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over them. "But remember, power comes with responsibility, Princess Aralyn. Do not squander it. The eyes of the Empire are ever watchful." A quiet triumph surged through her, tempered by the awareness of the challenges still ahead. She had secured her position, safeguarded her family, and gained autonomy over her own future. Yet she knew this was only the beginning. The court, the emperor, and Lucian would all continue to test her, probing for weakness, seeking advantage. And she would need every ounce of her cunning, her foresight, and her resolve to navigate the treacherous waters ahead. As they departed the palace, Aralyn felt the first taste of true empowerment. For the first time in her life, she understood the power of foresight, of planning, and of acting with purpose. She was no longer a passive observer, a victim of circumstance. She was Aralyn, Princess of Fuan, a woman who had survived betrayal, death, and despair, and who now commanded her own destiny. And in the quiet moments as the carriage carried them back to Aldercrest, she allowed herself a fleeting, private thought, one she had never permitted in her previous life. She smiled, a small, triumphant curl of her lips. "Lucian," she whispered to herself, voice soft but sharp, "you will not touch me again. Not my heart, not my family, not my life. This time, the game is mine." The road ahead was long and fraught with danger, but for the first time, she welcomed it. For the first time, she was not merely surviving, she was in control. The evening air in Aldercrest Manor was heavy with the scent of jasmine and burning candles, a delicate sweetness masking the tension that lingered in the halls. Aralyn walked among the guests at a lavish social gathering, her skirts brushing against the polished floor, a mask of composure firmly in place. Her mind, however, was far from the polite conversation, the laughter, the clinking of crystal. She had learned long ago that appearances could be weaponized, and tonight, she sensed the threads of a trap being woven just beyond her vision. It began innocuously enough. Valeria approached her, pale and trembling, her voice quivering as she whispered, "Aralyn, I need your help." The plea sounded genuine, laced with fear and desperation. "Lucian, he's hurting me. I don't know what to do. Please, you must come with me." Aralyn's chest tightened. She could feel the pull of her old instincts, the desire to comfort, to forgive, to trust, but she had survived betrayal once before. This time, she would not be swayed by lies. She allowed herself a small, sympathetic smile, carefully measured, while inwardly preparing for the confrontation. Her guards, hidden among the crowd, were briefed and ready, their presence unnoticed but potent. She would go, but on her own terms. "I will come with you," Aralyn said softly, her voice carrying enough conviction to mask the calculation behind it. "Lead the way." Valeria's relief was palpable, though Aralyn caught the flicker of something darker in her eyes, a spark of triumph, quickly masked by fear. The young woman led her through winding corridors to a secluded sitting room, far from the prying eyes of the other guests. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, and Aralyn's pulse quickened not with fear, but with anticipation. She had been here before, in a sense, though this time she was armed with foresight and careful preparation. "Aralyn, please, I don't know what to do," Valeria said again, her voice trembling. She moved closer, her hand brushing Aralyn's arm, a gesture meant to convey desperation, intimacy, and trust. Aralyn did not flinch, though every fiber of her body screamed in alert. She could see the trap. Lucian would be waiting, Valeria would play the victim, and the room would soon become a stage for their deceit. I understand, Aralyn said calmly, her voice soft but firm. Let's see what can be done. The door opened suddenly, and there he was. Lucian. His dark eyes glittered with something both familiar and terrifying: confidence, menace, and a hint of past knowledge that sent a chill down her spine. So predictable, he murmured, stepping fully into the room. You should have known, Aralyn, that I would anticipate this. Aralyn's lips curved into a small, calculated smile. And yet, here I am, she replied, her tone serene. Not a victim, not unprepared. You overestimate your control, Lucian. He moved closer, a predator circling its prey. And yet, he said, you still come to me. Even now, you trust me, if only for a moment. Aralyn's mind raced. She could see the scenario unfold as clearly as if she were watching a painting: Lucian's men hidden behind the walls, the trap Valeria had set, the witnesses who might be called. She allowed herself to appear hesitant, playing into the illusion just enough to bait him. Perhaps, she said softly, I am curious what game you intend to play. Lucian's lips twisted into a dangerous smile. Curiosity can be costly, he murmured. But it seems you are as clever as you were in your past life. Tell me, Aralyn, do you remember? Her heart skipped. His words hinted at knowledge only someone who had shared her previous life could know. Was he truly aware? Or was this a calculated ruse to unnerve her? She could not afford uncertainty. Every movement, every glance, every word mattered. I remember everything, she said, letting the words hang in the air. Her voice was calm, yet edged with authority. And I am ready for you. The tension in the room snapped. Lucian's eyes narrowed, assessing, calculating, and Aralyn felt the thrill of danger in her veins. This was no longer a simple trap, this was a duel of minds, of foresight and cunning, and she had the advantage. With a subtle gesture, she signaled her hidden guards. They emerged silently, encircling the room without drawing attention, their presence enough to shift the balance of power. Lucian's face hardened, realizing that his surprise advantage had evaporated. Clever, he admitted, a hint of grudging respect in his tone. Very clever. But cleverness alone will not save you. Aralyn's lips pressed into a line. Perhaps not. But combined with preparation, foresight, and resolve, it is enough. With precision, she enacted the plan she had constructed in her mind. Valeria, drugged subtly by Aralyn's careful preparations, slumped into a chair, unconscious but unharmed. Lucian, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of armed guards, was forced to the ground, his struggles contained by the silent, disciplined force Aralyn had deployed. The room, once a chamber of potential betrayal, became a stage where Aralyn controlled the narrative. She stepped forward, calm and composed, the storm of her past life behind her giving way to the clarity of this moment. The game is not yours anymore, she said, her voice quiet but sharp. I decide the rules now. Lucian's eyes burned with anger and something darker, something she could not quite name: fear, perhaps, or the dawning realization that the future he had meticulously calculated was slipping from his grasp. This is not over, he hissed. Aralyn tilted her head, a small smile of triumph playing at her lips. For you, Lucian, perhaps it is. Her guards secured him and the unconscious Valeria, ensuring that neither would escape or cause harm. And as Aralyn surveyed the room, she felt a surge of satisfaction, not from cruelty, but from justice, from finally turning the tables on those who had once destroyed her. Yet even in her triumph, a flicker of unease remained. Lucian's words, his knowledge of her past life, hinted at a danger she could not fully predict. She had survived once before, but the game had grown more complex, the stakes higher. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that this encounter was only the beginning. As the door closed behind the last guard, sealing Lucian and Valeria in the room, Aralyn exhaled, the weight of the confrontation lifting slightly. She allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The woman she had been, the one who had cried and begged and lost everything, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid. And she would not stop. Not until Lucian's treachery was undone, Valeria's lies exposed, and her family secured from the shadows that threatened them. The poisoned sisterhood had been confronted, and for the first time, the venom was no longer hers to bear. The corridors of Aldercrest Manor were alive with whispers. Candlelight flickered against the walls, casting shifting shadows over the polished floors, yet no shadow could hide the dread that pressed heavily over the household. Aralyn had felt confident when she had orchestrated Lucian and Valeria's capture, sure that her foresight and careful planning had secured her family from further harm. But the unexpected can be cruel, and Lucian's cruelty had always exceeded her expectations. The commotion began subtly, a ripple in the polished surface of the evening. Guests, already gossiping in hushed tones about Valeria and Lucian's earlier scandal, began to murmur more urgently. Servants ran past with frantic expressions, doors opened with abrupt force, and soon a gathering of shocked faces formed at the far end of the hall. Aralyn approached, moving quickly but deliberately, her mind already racing to piece together what had occurred. She found herself among the guests, her eyes catching the chaos. Valeria lay collapsed, pale and still, and beside her, the air seemed heavy, charged with the panic of those who had discovered the scene. A closer inspection revealed the unbearable truth. Valeria was dead. The baby she carried, a life Aralyn had once imagined saving in another reality, was gone. Her chest constricted, a cold, sharp pain stabbing through her heart. Her mind recoiled, trying to process the brutality of what had happened. And then he appeared, Lucian, striding calmly through the crowd as if he had just completed some routine task, cradling Valeria's lifeless form. His eyes met hers briefly, a flash of something terrible and triumphant in their depths, before he allowed the guise of grief and devotion to cloak him like a practiced mask. Aralyn, he whispered, so softly that it might have been a private confession, 1 corpse, 2 lives. I've returned her to you. The words cut through her like ice. Shock and horror battled inside her, twisting her stomach, clawing at her throat. He had taken the life of his own child and framed her, a grotesque mockery of the power she had thought she wielded. The court, already alert to scandal, would see Aralyn as culpable, her family's honor tarnished in a single, horrifying stroke. Gasps echoed through the hall. Some of the guests recoiled in horror, others whispered accusations, and servants wept openly. Aralyn's mother, Lady Amara, fell to her knees beside Valeria, her sobs a raw and visceral echo of a mother's grief. Lord Cedric's jaw tightened, his hands trembling with the fury of a man faced with an injustice he cannot immediately right. Aralyn forced herself to breathe, to focus. She could not allow the weight of shock to paralyze her. Lucian had assumed she would crumble, that the grotesque nature of his actions would make her easy prey for imperial wrath or public condemnation. But she was not that girl anymore. She had survived betrayal, death, and the unbearable pain of loss before. She could survive this. And she would turn this atrocity to her advantage. Lucian moved closer to the dais, carrying Valeria's body with the solemnity of a man performing a sacred ritual. The guests parted instinctively, creating a path for him that was both practical and symbolic, elevating him in the eyes of the court. See how devoted I am, he said softly to those gathered, his tone almost mournful. See how grief-stricken I am for what has been lost. Aralyn's gaze hardened. The horror of the scene was real, but so too was her resolve. She would not allow Lucian's manipulations to dictate the narrative. With a quiet gesture, she signaled to her hidden allies within the court, those loyal to her family from past alliances, those who had quietly observed Lucian's previous deceptions. They began to gather evidence, witness accounts, and subtle indications that Lucian's story was incomplete, that the tragedy he presented had layers he intended to hide. And yet, the political damage was undeniable. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into accusations, and the scandal spread like wildfire through the court. Aldercrest Manor, once a symbol of honor and stability, was now painted with the brush of tragedy and suspicion. Aralyn's father moved swiftly to protect the family, directing loyal guards to secure the estate and ensuring that no harm came to the household amid the chaos. But even his presence could not quell the storm entirely. Aralyn stood at the center of it all, her face a mask of composure, her eyes cold and calculating. She allowed herself a single, private thought, a promise to Valeria, to the child she had once hoped to protect, to the family whose honor had been assaulted. Lucian had played his hand. He had escalated the cruelty, tested her resolve, and tried to fracture the bonds of trust and loyalty that she had worked so hard to secure. But she would not break. She would survive. And she would ensure that he would pay for the lives he had stolen. As Lucian passed by her, still cradling Valeria's body, his lips barely brushed her ear. Remember, he whispered, venom in the guise of intimacy, 1 corpse, 2 lives. The game is far from over, Aralyn. She felt the cold strike of his words, but she did not flinch. Instead, she watched him with measured attention, noting every subtle shift in his posture, every micro-expression of triumph and insecurity. He thought he had won, but he had underestimated her foresight, her cunning, and her resolve. The guests began to disperse slowly, leaving the family to contend with the immediate tragedy and the scandal that would surely follow. Aralyn remained by the window, gazing out at the night sky, the moonlight reflecting on the gardens below. She allowed herself a single, quiet moment to grieve, not for Valeria, not even fully for the unborn child, but for the cruel reminder of what treachery could inflict upon those who were unprepared. Then her resolve hardened. Lucian's cruelty, while shocking, had given her clarity. He would no longer operate in the shadows, manipulating, plotting, killing to achieve his ambitions. She had survived the worst of the court's deceit before, and she would do so again, this time with knowledge, foresight, and an unbreakable determination. Her father's hand on her shoulder brought her back to the present. "We will recover from this," he said quietly. "We must be careful, yes, but we will recover. We have the power to endure and to act, Aralyn. And we will." Aralyn nodded, her eyes cold but resolute. She would survive this. She would expose Lucian. She would reclaim her family's honor. And she would ensure that the lives stolen, the innocents destroyed, would not be in vain. The night stretched on, heavy with grief and whispered speculation, yet within Aralyn, a fire burned brighter than ever. She had faced betrayal, death, and the loss of everything once before. Now she faced it again, and this time, she would not fail. Lucian had delivered his brutal message, but Aralyn was already planning her response. She would turn tragedy into strategy, despair into action, and cruelty into justice. The game had grown darker, the stakes higher, but she was ready. She would survive. She would endure. And she would win. The court of the Emperor was a labyrinth of whispers, ambition, and veiled threats. Every glance, every gesture, every smile could conceal the sharp edge of manipulation. Aralyn watched from her private quarters at Aldercrest Manor as Lucian, the man who had once been her husband and the architect of her suffering, maneuvered himself with the precision of a predator. He was no longer merely a schemer, he was a rising force, carefully weaving alliances and exploiting the misfortune that had befallen her family to his own advantage. The scandal of Valeria's death had left the Aldercrest name sullied in the eyes of the court. Rumors painted the household as negligent, as weak, as incapable of controlling even the smallest misfortune. Aralyn's father, Lord Cedric, had withdrawn from courtly affairs entirely, surrendering both influence and military command to secure her safety, and the vacuum of power had been filled by Lucian. Lucian moved through the court with the practiced charm of a man who understood exactly how to exploit appearances. His grief-stricken displays, the meticulous care with which he mourned Valeria, and the seeming loyalty he offered to the first prince, all of it elevated him in the eyes of those who judged on appearances rather than truth. He became indispensable, the quiet whisper behind decisions, the ally who seemed selfless yet calculated. Aralyn observed all of it with unblinking eyes. She understood, better than anyone, that appearances could be deceiving. Lucian's rise was fueled by tragedy, by perception, and by the court's appetite for dramatic heroes. And yet, for all his cleverness, he was blind to the fact that the most dangerous force in the game herself had not only survived, but grown stronger. Within the privacy of her chambers, Aralyn plotted. Maps and ledgers were spread across the table, lines drawn in ink connecting allies, former enemies, and potential instruments of influence. Every decision she had made since her return had been deliberate, every observation had been noted, every gesture catalogued. She would not act hastily, not yet. Patience was her weapon, and she wielded it with precision. The first prince, previously overlooked by the court and underestimated by Lucian, became Lucian's ally, a tool in his quest for influence. He leaned on Lucian's apparent loyalty, accepting guidance that he believed was in his own best interest. Lucian, confident in his foresight, believed he controlled the narrative entirely. But Aralyn's mind was several steps ahead, quietly preparing the pieces for a counter-strategy that would upend his assumptions. Meanwhile, Aldercrest Manor became a silent hub of subtle influence. Loyal servants and former allies maintained contact with sympathetic courtiers and military leaders, providing Aralyn with intelligence that no one suspected she could gather. Her father, though officially retired, moved behind the scenes, advising her and supporting her efforts without revealing the full extent of their strategy. Her grandmother, Lady Isolde, remained a constant presence, a steady hand guiding Aralyn in the arts of diplomacy, observation, and timing. Lucian, meanwhile, became more emboldened. Every courtly favor, every whispered compliment, every subtle act of loyalty to the first prince strengthened his position. He believed the past was irrelevant, that Aralyn's family had been neutralized, that the scandal had permanently diminished their influence. He did not see the careful reconstruction taking place behind the walls of Aldercrest, the invisible threads Aralyn was weaving to reclaim power and exact justice. Aralyn allowed herself moments of quiet reflection in the evenings, standing at the high windows of her chambers, gazing at the moonlit gardens. She thought of Valeria, of the child lost in Lucian's cruelty, of the mistakes she had made in her past life. Each memory was a sharpened tool, each grief a lesson that hardened her resolve. She would not falter. She would not allow the court or the emperor to dictate her fate, nor would she allow Lucian to believe himself untouchable. Then, the first move of her plan took shape. She began cultivating a discreet alliance with Prince Theron, the emperor's legitimate and astute son. Unlike the first prince, whose ambitions were largely fueled by vanity and impatience, Theron was clever, deliberate, and deeply aware of the shifting currents within the court. Through intermediaries, Aralyn provided subtle counsel, offering insights that appeared accidental or coincidental, yet positioned Theron to undermine his rivals without revealing her hand. The court remained oblivious to her influence. Lucian, convinced of his unassailable position, continued to play his role, unaware that every action he took was being watched, analyzed, and anticipated by the woman he had once believed powerless. Aralyn's patience became her weapon, allowing her to strike indirectly, shaping events without ever revealing her presence. Months passed, and the tide began to turn subtly but unmistakably. The first prince's influence grew, but it became increasingly apparent that he relied heavily on Lucian's counsel. Small miscalculations, strategic errors, and overlooked vulnerabilities began to accumulate, eroding the foundations of Lucian's carefully constructed power base. Aralyn observed, waited, and noted, never revealing her hand, but steadily guiding the forces aligned with Theron to exploit every weakness. One night, as Aralyn studied the map-strewn table in her chambers, her father joined her. "The first prince is ambitious, but short-sighted," Cedric said quietly, eyes scanning the lines of strategy she had drawn. "Lucian thinks himself untouchable. He does not realize the true game being played." Aralyn nodded, feeling a surge of satisfaction. "By the time he understands, it will be too late. The pieces are in place, and Theron is ready. We just need the right moment." Cedric placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of both pride and affection. "You have grown into a formidable strategist, Aralyn. Far beyond the girl who once nearly lost everything. Your foresight and patience will be the undoing of those who underestimated you." And she believed him. For the first time, Aralyn felt the full weight and thrill of her power. The world might have assumed Aldercrest had fallen, that scandal had permanently weakened her family, that Lucian was untouchable. But she knew the truth: strength is often invisible until it strikes. She would endure, she would act, and she would reclaim all that had been taken from her. The shift of power was underway. Lucian's rise was real, but so was Aralyn's unseen hand, shaping, guiding, and plotting the eventual collapse of his carefully constructed empire. The game had grown larger, the stakes higher, but she was ready. She had survived death and betrayal once, she would do so again, and this time, she would emerge victorious. The night drew on, quiet but electric with anticipation. Aralyn's eyes, reflecting the moonlight on the polished floors, held a sharp, unwavering promise: the future would belong to her, and every move Lucian made would bring him closer to ruin. The morning sun had barely broken over the horizon when Aralyn arrived at the palace gardens, the dew still clinging to the rose bushes and the soft scent of blooming jasmine filling the air. She moved with quiet purpose along the marble paths, her skirts swishing gently, a mask of serene composure in place. But beneath that calm exterior, her mind churned with strategy, foresight, and an ever-present vigilance. Prince Theron awaited her near a fountain, the water glimmering in the dawn light, his posture relaxed yet attentive, eyes sharp and calculating. Unlike the other nobles, whose motivations were easily swayed by flattery or fear, Theron possessed an instinct for political subtlety, a natural intelligence that Aralyn had come to admire. He was not easily fooled, but he could be guided, and she had plans for guidance that would shape the future of the court and of her own life. "Aralyn," he said, inclining his head in greeting. "You requested this meeting at a rather early hour." His tone was calm, polite, yet tinged with curiosity. "And I suspect you have a purpose beyond admiring the roses." A faint smile curved Aralyn's lips. "You are correct, Your Highness. Time is precious, and there are matters we must discuss that cannot wait until the court is fully awake." She paused, letting the weight of her gaze convey the urgency and gravity of the situation. Lucian is consolidating power, weaving himself into the first prince's favor, and gaining influence faster than any of us anticipated. If we do not act, the consequences could be catastrophic not just for my family, but for the stability of the realm. Theron's expression shifted subtly, his eyes narrowing as he considered her words. I have been aware of Lucian's maneuvers, he admitted. But you speak with the certainty of someone who has seen the outcome before it happens. Aralyn's pulse quickened slightly. She had never revealed the full extent of her foresight, and she had no intention of doing so now. Yet she needed him to trust her implicitly. I have learned much from experience, she said carefully, the words chosen to suggest wisdom without exposing the unnatural truth. We must coordinate. Your position, my family's influence, and the networks I have quietly maintained together, we can undermine Lucian's foundation before he realizes it is crumbling beneath him. Theron's eyes glimmered with interest, a spark of admiration for her acumen. And you believe this can be done without raising the Emperor's suspicion? Aralyn tilted her head, letting the sun catch the glint of determination in her eyes. We must act subtly, invisibly. Lucian believes he is untouchable because he underestimates the depth of what he cannot see. But with patience, intelligence, and the right alliances, we can shift the balance without alerting him or the Emperor to our hand until it is too late. He regarded her quietly for a moment, as if weighing her words against an invisible scale. Finally, he nodded. Very well, Aralyn. I trust your judgment. We will proceed cautiously, yet decisively. Your knowledge and foresight will guide us where others might fail. Their alliance, though unspoken and unofficial, became a delicate dance of subtle influence. Aralyn provided insights through discreet channels, appearing at times to offer casual advice or commentary, while Theron implemented measures in the court that gradually undermined Lucian's growing power. They coordinated messages, signals, and maneuvers that only they could interpret, their movements invisible to all but the most observant. At Aldercrest Manor, Aralyn's father and grandmother continued their own silent orchestration. Cedric, retired in title, remained a master of subtlety, providing intelligence and guidance while avoiding the Emperor's scrutiny. Lady Isolde, ever vigilant, tutored Aralyn in the art of reading intentions, predicting outcomes, and understanding the psychology of those who wielded power through manipulation rather than force. The months passed with the quiet intensity of a coiled spring. Lucian continued his ascent, yet small cracks began to appear. The first prince, once seemingly unshakable, began to make errors in judgment, influenced by Aralyn's subtle guidance of Theron's hand. Lucian's plans, while brilliant, were always one step behind the invisible force shaping the court from Aldercrest. Aralyn's own confidence grew alongside her influence. The girl who had once been naive and trusting had transformed into a woman of steel and intellect. She learned not only to anticipate the moves of others but to manipulate outcomes without revealing her intentions. She had become a strategist in her own right, wielding foresight like a blade and patience like armor. One evening, as the sky deepened into twilight and the first stars appeared, Aralyn walked with Theron along the palace terraces, the city lights glittering below them. Lucian believes he has the advantage, she said softly, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. He thinks the past no longer matters. But we are proving, quietly, that it does. We are shaping the future while he believes he is in control. Theron glanced at her, a rare smile touching his lips. You are remarkable, Aralyn. I can see why your family has always revered you. Few possess the combination of foresight, intellect, and patience that you demonstrate. And yet, I sense a strength in you beyond strategy, something more personal, more relentless. Aralyn met his gaze steadily, feeling the weight of unspoken truths and hidden knowledge between them. Strength is forged in fire, Prince Theron. In my previous life, I lost everything: my family, my child, my own life. I will not allow such loss to define this one. Every action I take now is to protect what I love and to ensure that treachery does not go unpunished. Theron nodded, respect and admiration shining in his eyes. Then we will act together, quietly, until the right moment arrives. And when it does, we will strike with precision. As they spoke, Aralyn felt a quiet thrill. The alliance was more than political, it was a bond forged in shared understanding, in subtlety, in vision. Together, they would reshape the court, reclaim Aldercrest's honor, and dismantle Lucian's rising power before he realized the tide had turned. The true power of foresight, Aralyn realized, was not only in knowing what would happen, but in guiding events so that others believed it had always been their choice. She had survived betrayal and death once before. Now, she was shaping the world, quietly and decisively, to ensure that the cruelty of the past could never reach her again. And as the moonlight shimmered on the terraces and the city slept below, Aralyn felt the first exhilarating taste of the future. She would command an empire of influence, strategy, and justice, built not on fear, but on foresight, patience, and unyielding resolve. The game was no longer about survival alone. It was about victory. The court of the emperor had never been so tense. The grand halls, which had once resounded with polite laughter and the soft rustle of silk, were now thick with suspicion, murmurs, and the heavy weight of expectation. Every noble, every servant, every attendant seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the inevitable collapse that Aralyn had long predicted. Lucian, who had once seemed untouchable, moved through the court with a practiced composure, though cracks had begun to form in his mask. The miscalculations, the subtle manipulations orchestrated by Aralyn and Prince Theron, were now converging. Alliances he had relied upon were shifting, favors he had thought secured quietly unraveled. The first prince, whose reliance on Lucian had seemed absolute, now found himself vulnerable, undermined by Theron's quiet but calculated counsel. Aralyn observed it all from her chamber, her calm demeanor belying the storm of satisfaction and anticipation that churned inside her. She had spent months shaping every detail, guiding Theron, maintaining Aldercrest's hidden networks, and anticipating every step Lucian would take. And now, as the pieces fell into place, the full extent of her strategy began to bear fruit. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, without fanfare, in the council chambers of the emperor. Lucian was summoned under the pretense of a routine consultation, unaware that the room had been carefully prepared. Witnesses, documentation of past deceit, and evidence of manipulation were already assembled, waiting to expose him fully. As he entered, the courtiers' murmur swelled into a low hum of expectation. Lucian's eyes flicked nervously toward Aralyn, though he maintained his composure, his mind racing to anticipate what might unfold. He had underestimated her once, and the thought of underestimating her again sent an almost imperceptible shiver through him. The emperor, seated with the gravity of absolute authority, gestured for silence. "Lucian of House Ravelin," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "You stand accused of treason, deception, and actions that have brought dishonor and peril to the empire. Evidence has been presented. Witnesses have spoken. And the pattern of your conduct cannot be ignored." Lucian's face hardened. "Majesty, I am loyal." Silence, the emperor interrupted sharply. "The evidence speaks for itself." He gestured, and documents were placed on the table before the council, letters, witness testimonies, reports of covert manipulations, and accounts of Valeria's death framed as an incident meant to implicate another. Lucian's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Aralyn watched, a quiet satisfaction simmering beneath her composed exterior. The man who had orchestrated her suffering, who had destroyed her family's honor and taken the life of an innocent child, was finally being exposed. But even as his influence waned, she knew the moment would be fraught with emotion. Lucian had once been more than an adversary. He had been a man she had trusted, and the betrayal had left scars she carried still. As the council deliberated, Lucian's defenses weakened. Allies who had once supported him now hesitated, wary of being associated with a man whose schemes had been laid bare. The first prince, realizing his own vulnerability, stepped aside, leaving Lucian isolated. Every gesture, every whisper, every calculated move that had once served him now worked against him. When the judgment was finally delivered, it was both swift and severe. Lucian and his family were condemned for treason. The court gasped at the fall of a man who had seemed invincible, his influence dissolved like mist in the morning sun. Lucian fell to his knees, the first real sign of vulnerability Aralyn had ever seen. "Mercy," he whispered, voice strained, his gaze flicking toward her. "Please." Aralyn. Her eyes, cold and unyielding, met his. The years of suffering, the child she had lost, the betrayal, and the manipulation all coalesced into a single, unflinching resolve. "Mercy is not yours to seek," she said softly, her voice calm but edged with steel. "You destroyed what could never be replaced. My family, my child, my trust, all lost because of your cruelty." Lucian's lips trembled. "You will speak no more," Aralyn interrupted. She turned her gaze to the emperor, who had observed the exchange with measured detachment. "Let justice be done," she said. "Let him answer for the lives he has destroyed." The sentence was carried out with precision. Lucian's family, complicit or silent in his schemes, faced public condemnation, their names stripped of honor, their properties seized, and their influence erased. Lucian himself, though spared immediate death at Aralyn's discretion, was left broken, silenced, and removed from power entirely. As the court dispersed, Aralyn remained in the chamber, absorbing the gravity of what had transpired. The fall of Lucian was complete, and the Aldercrest name, while once tarnished, now stood resilient. Justice had been served, but the weight of her actions was not lost on her. She had achieved what she had set out to do, yet the cost, the years of fear, betrayal, and the lives harmed remained a shadow she would carry. Prince Theron approached quietly, his presence a calm anchor in the aftermath. "You did it," he said softly. "You shaped the outcome, protected your family, and ensured that justice was served. Few could have accomplished what you have." Aralyn's lips curved in a faint, tired smile. "I only did what had to be done. The past cannot be undone, but the future can be shaped. And that is what I have done." Theron's gaze met hers, understanding the layers beneath her words, the grief, the resolve, and the careful orchestration of every move that had brought them to this point. "And now," he asked quietly, "what will you do now?" Aralyn exhaled, feeling the weight of the long struggle lift slightly. "Now," she said, voice steady, "I will protect what remains. My family, my home, and the power I have fought to secure. And I will ensure that no one ever wields such cruelty over us again." The Emperor, observing from his seat, inclined his head slightly toward her, a rare acknowledgement of her wisdom and strength. The court had shifted, the balance of power altered, and Aralyn stood not as a victim, but as a force of strategic intelligence and unyielding resolve. And as the sun set over the palace, casting long shadows across the marble floors, Aralyn allowed herself a single moment of private satisfaction. Justice had been done. The treacherous had fallen. And for the first time in years, she could breathe not in fear, but in triumph, knowing that the future was hers to command. The dungeon was cold. Stone walls, damp with the lingering chill of decades, pressed in on Lucian, whose once imposing presence was now diminished to a trembling figure shackled and broken. The flickering torchlight cast uneven shadows across his gaunt face, highlighting the lines of fear and disbelief etched deeply where arrogance and confidence had once ruled. Aralyn entered with measured steps, her skirts silent against the stone floor, her eyes sharp and unwavering. This was the moment she had both dreaded and anticipated, the confrontation she had imagined countless times in her previous life, now finally within her grasp. She had walked a careful path to reach this point, outmaneuvering Lucian at every turn, watching him rise only to orchestrate his collapse. And now, she would face him, unmasked, in the truth of what he had done. Lucian lifted his eyes at her approach, his expression a mixture of defiance, disbelief, and something else, fear, sharp and unfamiliar. "Aralyn," he whispered, his voice hoarse, you cannot." "Silence," she said softly, but with steel in her tone. "No words will absolve you, Lucian. No excuses, no pleas, no remorse. You know what you did. You took what could never be replaced, my child, my trust, my family's honor, and for that, there is only reckoning." His eyes darted to her, searching for mercy that would not come, for a hint of the naive woman he had once deceived. But Aralyn had grown beyond that girl. She had survived betrayal, death, and despair. She had risen through the ashes of her past, and she held the power now, the authority to enact justice and deliver finality. "You think you can frighten me?" he rasped. "You think you have the right?" Aralyn stepped closer, her gaze steady, unwavering. "I do not act out of fear, nor for vengeance born of anger alone. I act to reclaim what was stolen, to protect what remains, and to ensure that no one else suffers as I have. This is not punishment for hatred, it is justice for cruelty." Lucian's face twisted, a mix of defiance and disbelief. You were nothing without me." "Nothing?" Aralyn's voice sharpened. "I was betrayed, yes. I was deceived, yes. But even in my weakness, I survived. And in my strength, I rose above you. I do not need you. I never needed you. Your control was an illusion, and now it is broken." For a moment, silence reigned. The only sounds were the drip of water from the dungeon walls and the faint echo of distant footsteps in the corridors above. Lucian's bravado had crumbled, replaced with the hollow realization that he had lost everything: the power he had coveted, the alliances he had manipulated, the future he had imagined. Aralyn's expression softened slightly, not in mercy, but in acknowledgement of the man he had once been, before cruelty consumed him. She allowed herself a final, private reflection, the grief of her lost child, the heartbreak of betrayal, and the years spent navigating treachery. All of it had led her here, to this moment of closure. "You will live," she said finally, her voice firm. "Not to wield power, not to manipulate, not to threaten. But to witness what happens when cruelty is met with foresight, patience, and resolve. You will exist only as a shadow of the life you thought you controlled. And in that existence, you will understand the weight of your actions." Lucian slumped against the wall, shackled and powerless. His lips moved, attempting words, but none could convey the desperation or fear that now consumed him. Aralyn turned, her task complete, and left him there alive, yet diminished, a living testament to the justice she had orchestrated. The palace awaited her next. Prince Theron, now the new emperor following the demise of his rival, had extended an offer that many would have accepted without hesitation: the crown, the prestige, and the title of empress. But Aralyn's heart, tempered by the fires of betrayal and loss, sought a different path. She had survived, she had reclaimed power, but she had also learned the value of freedom and the sanctuary of family. "Your Highness," she said gently to Theron as they met in the golden halls of the palace, "I am grateful for your trust and your offer. But my place is not here as empress. My duty is to my family, to the home I have rebuilt, and to the future I will shape for those I love. I choose freedom over crowns, agency over titles, and safety over uncertainty." Theron regarded her quietly, a faint smile touching his lips. "You are wise, Aralyn. And strong. The Empire is fortunate to have someone of your caliber, even if you do not sit upon the throne. Your influence will guide it nonetheless, without the chains of ceremonial duty." Aralyn allowed herself a small, private smile, the weight of the past lifting slightly. The halls of Aldercrest Manor would be hers to govern, her family safe, her estate secure, and her future open to her own choices. The power she held was no longer imposed upon her, it was hers, hard-won and deliberate. In the weeks that followed, a decree was issued by the new emperor. Aralyn, as the heir of the Aldercrest line, would hold full authority over her family's estates, titles, and influence. For the first time in the realm's history, a woman would officially inherit and lead a noble house, commanding respect and power independent of marriage or male oversight. Aralyn walked through the halls of Aldercrest Manor, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, illuminating the tapestries and the polished floors. Her family, restored to honor and security, moved about with a quiet sense of relief and reverence. She had ensured their safety, reclaimed their legacy, and established her own path forward. And in that moment, Aralyn allowed herself something she had never truly permitted before: the knowledge that she had survived not just with cunning and strategy, but with grace, intelligence, and unbreakable resolve. The past could not be erased, nor could the losses she had endured be undone. But the future, her future, was hers to command. As the wind stirred the curtains and the gardens outside shimmered in the late afternoon light, Aralyn felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced betrayal, death, and cruelty, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and free. The path ahead was hers to define, guided by foresight, tempered by experience, and unburdened by the chains of fear or obligation. And for the first time in her life, Aralyn smiled fully, unguarded, knowing that she had not only survived but had truly won.